Hello, this is Howard Kravets, the host of the HHH Racing Podcast. Thanks for joining me on this very special video. No video montage of the HHH Racing Podcast. This is a different type of video. There are several people that have asked me to do a video about myself, about some things that many people may not know about me, my family, background, etc. And I'm very excited to present that to you this evening. I do not know how long this video will be. I will not drone on forever. But thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for your support of the HHH Racing Podcast. It means the world to me and all of my co-hosts as well. I'd love to hear your comments about this video, about my story that I'm going to share with you. So below the video player, please comment the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm going to share many personal things with you. I'm assuming they are going to resonate with many of you in different ways, or perhaps not. But if you'd like to email me, hkravitshorse@gmail.com, I would prefer if you were going to email me, it would only be for um, some very personal stories that you might want to share that you do not want to have made public. Otherwise, just general comments. Please comment down below the video player. I'd love to see many of your comments. Again, perhaps some things that I say will resonate with you. It might make you laugh, cry, even, who knows. But I'm going to share many things with you tonight. I have some pictures also that I want to share. I'm filming this again on April 26th. This is the 2023. This is the week before the Kentucky Derby, and I thought it'd be a good time to make this video now. Give my co-host a little bit of a break as we get cranked up for a crazy, exciting, good Derby week here on the HHH Racing Podcast. Look for information on Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter. By the way, you see on my name tag down below at H Kravets. You can follow me on Twitter there as well. But we'll have information about all of our Kentucky Derby shows coming up. Of course, I'm assuming many people will be watching this video well after the Kentucky Derby, so I don't want to talk more about the promotions, depending, of course, when you're watching this video. Um, like I said, I'm going to be very honest. I'm going to be raw. I'm going to share some things that you certainly do not know about me. I'm not going to tell you everything about my life. This is not going to be a 3-hour video. But there are some things that I do think you'd be interested in that I want to share with you this evening. I broke it up into 4 categories about my family, sort of my professional life, what I've done, and then get into the gambling stories that I have and sort of how that all began. And then, of course, the beginnings of the HHH Racing Podcast, of which I'm the host and founder, and I'm very proud of. So let's start with where it all began with my family. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago in a town called Deerfield, which, if you're in the Chicago area, you might know. It's a very nice community in the northern suburbs. It's an upper middle class community. And I was blessed to have two fantastic parents. I was born and raised in the northern suburbs of Chicago. When I was brought home from the hospitals in newborn, I lived in the same house until about 23 years old, other than going to college and a few other things. But I did not move around at all. It was a very stable environment. So let me just show you a picture of my parents. Unfortunately, which I'm going to talk about, both my parents have passed, and I'll share some information about that. So this picture that you're going to see is probably mid 2000s to maybe 2010, somewhere around there. Actually, it's probably earlier than that. I'd say it's mid 2000s to early 2000s, I think, would be the approximate time. And I'll go ahead and show you a picture of my parents, and they're my parents. God bless their souls. On the left, it was my mother, Fern, and on the right, my father, Robert, or Bob. So there's Fern and Bob Kravets or Robert Kravets. Those are my parents, and the thought is that I look more like my father, which I think is probably fair to say. So there's a picture of my parents. It's one of my favorite pictures of them. And if I look to the right or I look over, I've got some pictures and things that I uh, want to show you. Um, yeah, so my parents were great. I have two older sisters and a younger brother, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But let me talk about my parents first. We were raised in a upper middle class family, and there were many wealthy people sort of around us, and we were not the very wealthy ones in the community at all. I'll go ahead and show you our house in that I grew up in Deerfield. It's a very nice ranch house. I'll put up on the screen right now so you can see it. There it is. That's the house I grew up in. Nice ranch house. There was four children, myself and three siblings, and my two parents. That's the house that I lived in for my first 23 years of my life in Deerfield, Illinois. And so my parents were the type of people that are very conservative with their money. They weren't tight with their money. They weren't cheap at all. They just spent money on things that they felt were important. We didn't go on a lot of family vacations, even though we could have. I probably went on two or three family vacations in my life until about 17 years old. They rather make sure the roof was all good, and the water heater was fully functioning, and they were just very practical people. Um, and I appreciate that because it taught me the value of money and how to spend it. And while I had friends who were going on winter vacation and spring vacation to Cancun or Florida or wherever else they were going, we were usually home, which is fine with me because we had a close knit family in general. And so that was okay. Um, so let me show a picture. Well, I'll wait till show my brother. So as time went along, unfortunately, they both had some illnesses, and this was it was tough. It was tough. My mother passed away in 2010 of ovarian cancer. There is some cancer and some other disease within the family dynamic. She was diagnosed 16 months before she passed in November of 2010. And she was sort of the heartbeat of the entire family, probably like perhaps your mother, if you're watching this, or mothers you might know of other uh, families. She was the social butterfly. She made all the plans with our extended family. Um, she was the rock. She was just absolutely unbelievable in many ways. And so, we knew at one point, that she went into hospice. We knew that was going to be, the beginning of the end. And she was in hospice for about 4 months. And yeah, that was very difficult. There's really not too much to say. Anyone who's been through a loss, you know how difficult that was. And so, I certainly was well into my adult years at that point. I'm 51 right now. So I was, about 38 when she passed. But it's never easy. And so that was very difficult. Uh, and then my father ended up having some health issues. As he went along after my mother had passed, and he was heartbroken, of course, over my mother's death, and he passed in 2017. I've talked about him a little bit in his passing because my good friend and co-host Paul Halloran, we are kindred spirits. Both of our fathers passed away literally within days, right around the 2017 Breeders' Cup at Del Mar. My father passed away actually on Saturday, Breeders' Cup Day, at Del Mar 2017. I was at the OTV at the time. I visited him in the morning. We didn't know when he was going to pass. It could have been days, weeks. We really weren't sure. He was always someone that said, to his children, myself and my brother and sisters, live your life, blah, blah, blah. Um, and so I did visit him the morning that he passed. He was unconscious at that time, and obviously close to death, although I didn't know how close. And I got a call from the nursing home at about 2:30 Chicago time that he had passed, and I obviously left the OTB immediately. Didn't have any desire, of course, to make any bets at all, even though uh, I spent a lot of time handicapping, blah blah blah. But who cares at that point? So I just ran out of the OTB and went to the nursing home, and so yeah, so we lost him in 2017. So at the age of, 45, I lost both my parents, which is not that young, obviously. I have incredible amount of sympathy and heartache for those of you out there that lost a parent at a much younger age, or especially your childhood, or perhaps only grew up with one parent for whatever reason, which in itself is not a bad thing. It can be a good thing, but yeah, losses sucks for sure, and that was difficult. What should they do? Interestingly enough, my mother was a guidance counselor, social worker, elementary school teacher for years, and my father was a psychiatrist. And with a guidance counselor for a mother and a psychiatrist as a father, the joke is that's why I'm so screwed up. Uh, so anyway, no, we were pretty well adjusted. We were certainly taught to share our emotions and our feelings. We didn't hide too much from each other, and it was nice to know that we were able to grow up in that kind of loving environment where we were able to share our feelings and express concerns, and so that was a real positive. Um, Let me talk a little bit about what happened after. So after my father passed, 2000, which was 2017, 2017 to 2020 was extremely difficult for me for many reasons. Um, Physically, gained weight, still trying to work that off. Emotionally, for obvious reasons. Financially, as well, for reasons I rather not get into. Um, Really, my father's passing was, and right before his passing and after was, it broke up the family, the siblings, and some extended family as well, for reasons again I rather not get into, but was very difficult. And then COVID, of course, was 2020. So had a real rough few years there, rough patch. I was not in a great place for many reasons. Professionally, things were going just fine, but behind the scenes, those of you that know me well know what was going on with the family dynamic. And I'm sure, again, many of you can relate out there, especially when people pass that have big influence on your family. Things don't always go the way you had planned. And since then, things have um, gotten a lot better in that way, but in other ways they have not. And so you move on, you live your life and you move on. Someone who has been an absolute rock in my life for most of my life, but especially, since I would say, 2000, well, since my mother had passed, and last 15 years, especially, is my brother. My brother Michael. I've talked about him a little bit on the show, not too much. He's a very successful CFO. He does very well. I'm very proud of him. We are best friends. I'm sure he'd say the same. And we've had some great trips together. I'll just show you a picture of my brother Michael. This picture I'm going to show you was during a vacation where we went to Pebble Beach, California, and Monterey, because we're big golf fans. We played Pebble Beach Golf Course, and if you know Pebble Beach, you know this picture. There I am on the left, and there's my brother Michael on the right. Yes, we look alike at some extent. No, we are not twins. He's a year and a half younger than me. But of course, you see in the background there is the famous Pebble Beach tree. If you're a fan of Monterey, California, or you know about Pebble Beach or about golf, you know about that tree there in the background. The one in the furthest background is the famous Pebble Beach tree there. So there's my brother. We had many great uh, pictures and times on that trip, and he's fantastic. And I love having him in my life, and he's great. Um, so yeah, so that's about my family. I am currently about myself. I'm currently single. I've never been married. I've had some opportunities, haven't quite come to fruition. Probably too many Friday nights studying past performances and horse racing programs. But in all seriousness, I'm very happy being single. If the opportunity comes along and I meet a woman and something happens, great. If not, that's okay. I have talked to many people who have said, Howard, doesn't your life feel, unfulfilled, or aren't you lonely? Or no, not really. It's great being single. There are a lot of good things about being single. No one has to tell you what to do and when. I mean, it's not always wonderful, but in general, it's been good for me. And people say, wouldn't you like to have kids of your own? And I jokingly say I have 130 kids of my own, and those would be the students that I teach every year. So I get to work with young people all the time and try to mentor them, and it means a lot to me. And I feel like I'm making a difference. They're not my own children, of course, but still feel like I'm making a big difference. So, um, yeah, I do not have any children of my own. I've never been married. Perhaps I will at some point. Perhaps I won't. I don't know. I know a lot of people that are very happily married and have children and have a great family. I also know a lot of people that have been divorced and it's been ugly, and sometimes children have been involved and it's been bad, and they wish they'd never gotten married. And I don't know. I'm always live your life however you want to do it, as long as you're happy. That's all that I think matters to me. So that's a little information about my family. Um, Professionally, so I went to Indiana University. I graduated in 1994. I always thought I wanted to be an accountant, a CPA. Math is my strong suit. Obviously, I'm a high school math teacher, but I was never really a computer guy. I was not in computer science, and really, I always thought I'd either be accountant or my dream job, which was a sports broadcaster. I wanted to be Harry Carey. Those of you that are fans of baseball, of course, the longtime Chicago Cubs broadcaster. He's with the St. Louis Cardinals before, and the Chicago White Sox before that. Most people know who Harry Carey was. That's who I sort of wanted to be. I don't know if I wanted to be a play person, or if I wanted to be a news broadcaster and sit behind a camera like I am right now and talk. Um, but that's sort of what I always wanted to do. Accounting didn't really stick with me. It was much more theory than numbers. It just didn't. I struggled, and I was a very good student, and so I went into journalism. So I majored in journalism, got a journalism degree, and had some great opportunities. I was a journalist for the Indiana Daily Student, which was the newspaper, the student newspaper at Indiana University. So Paul Halloran, if you watch this, I think you know this. We are uh, co-journalists, although he does it on a professional basis along with some other things. Um, Interestingly enough, summer of 1994, I was doing an internship with the ABC affiliate in Chicago, Channel 7. And I was had two memorable things I'll share with you very quickly. Number one is I was actually in the studio. So I was at the news station. This is again the ABC affiliate in Chicago. It's one of the biggest news stations in the country. The day of the O.J. Simpson chase and the white Bronco and blah blah blah. I'm sure a lot of you who are old enough to know remember that. That was quite an experience being in the studio. I was just an intern, a runner. I was, doing many different things off air for many people. That was pretty crazy day. I remember it very well. And then the other thing I remember is one of the news broadcasters asked me one day, very casually, because they're used to being around athletes, Howard, you want to go to a Dream Team 2 practice? And he said it very nonchalantly. I'm like, are you kidding me? That was like a young Shaquille O'Neal, Scottie Pippen, like at his best, Isaiah Thomas, um, just Dan Marley, for you basketball fans out there, unbelievable shooter for the Phoenix Suns at the time. It was just incredible. Tim Hardaway, I believe, was on that team. You can look it up, Dream Team 2. And I went to a practice and I was 10 feet away from the players watching them practice. And all summer long, I was in locker rooms of Chicago Bears games, uh, White Sox, Cubs. And I was one of those people holding up a microphone. I mean, when you watch the news, you see a whole bank of microphones, but you don't see the people holding them. That was me like all summer. I was right there next to, I mean, I was 2 feet away from Shaquille O'Neal. What's up, Shaq? Up like that because he's huge. It was pretty cool just being around those professional. I was not on the air. I was just an intern at the time, but it really sparked my interest in becoming of trying to someone who wanted to be on air. Being on air is very difficult if you want to be a news broadcaster. I didn't know anyone in the business, and apparently I wasn't good enough. The joke was that I always had a face for radio. I don't know. If I do it again, I suppose I would go the radio route because I feel like I have a pretty good voice for that. But anyway, the whole broadcasting thing didn't quite pan out. I interned a few places. Fish weren't biting for a professional paying gig, and I went back to school. I went back to school and got my master's degree in education and followed the footsteps of my mother. And I have a master's degree in second education with math certification. And 26 years later, I am finishing, the school year here. So, 26 years of high school math teaching. It's been quite the journey. I also did a lot of coaching. I coached basketball for 20 years, mainly at the high school level, but I also coached middle school. I started coaching middle school, then I coached high school. I was a head varsity basketball coach for a few years. I coached at the junior college level as well. Basketball is the sport that I know best. I have a strong passion for basketball, other than horse racing, of course, but I'm talking from a coaching perspective. I also started the boys lacrosse program at my first high school, and we actually won a state championship. We were in like the lower division because lacrosse was just starting in Illinois at the time, but won a state championship and finished second in another one at a higher level. So lacrosse is a very cool sport. A lot of you out east know lacrosse very well, and it's just spread throughout the country. It's big, of course, in like Colorado, and it's really big throughout the whole country. But when I coached lacrosse from 1996, I think is when I started the program, or 97 to about 2005. It wasn't quite as big then in the Midwest or other places throughout the country, but it's grown tremendously. So I've had a lot of success coaching as well, and I've been coaching for a long time, but I certainly enjoy that as well. Um, okay, let's get on to the gambling part of it and sort of the horse racing. How I started. No one in my family uh, was involved in horse racing at all. The only real connection um, that I have to horse racing was my mother's father. So my grandfather, but he passed before I was born. And I was actually named after him. His name was Herbert, hence the H. Howard, named after my grandfather who had passed uh, before I was born. He, my mother's father, enjoyed going to the track in Chicago and would take my mother and her sister once in a while. I'm not sure my mother really enjoyed it that much, but so I guess the genes were passed down. They skipped a generation and went to me. I don't know. It's sort of interesting that I was named after someone who enjoyed going to the track. Um, but yeah, but my parents, my siblings, I mean, no one is involved in horse racing at all, wanted to go to the track. I mean, just completely out of the blue, except for perhaps my mother's father, Herbert, who I was named after. So I was a very late bloomer. I did not grow up at the track. I didn't know anything about horse racing growing up, had no desire. I mean, I remember watching some Kentucky Derbies. I thought it was cool. I don't know. I think Winning Colors, I think in '88 was probably the first Kentucky Derby I actually watched. And I was in like a junior in high school at the time. I don't even think I watched a Kentucky Derby before that. Maybe just in passing, but extremely casually. Um, the one I remember the most earlier was Monarchos, which I think was 1990, because I like gray horses and he was a big closer. But again, I was graduating high school. I knew nothing about horse racing really at all. My first live race that I ever went to was crazy, or live event. I had a friend who said, "Let's go to the track." I'm like, "Okay, sure, why not?" I was a senior in high school. It was the fall of 1989, and it just so happened we drove to Hawthorne Racecourse, which was about 45 minutes away. Uh, and it just so happened to be Breeders' Cup Saturday. Now, again, those of you that are my age or just understand there's no internet, we barely had cable TV at the time. I mean, I had no idea what the Breeders' Cup was, and we went there and it was absolutely packed. I think Hawthorne had live racing that day. I don't even remember, to be honest. I think they did, but perhaps not. And it was packed there. We could barely get a table, and we're watching a lot of races from, on TV. It happened to be from Gulfstream that year, and people were going crazy. I mean, people were totally into it. I was looking at the program like, okay, I'm good at math. I can figure this out. Absolutely no clue. We asked a few people like, to help us read it, and I don't know. I'm sure I lost my ass that day. A harbinger of things to come for the next 15, 20 years until I learned how to bet. But anyway, that was the Sunday Silence Easy Goer Breeders' Cup Classic. I mean, what an incredible day for your first like live horse racing card to watch, or even on TV. It was amazing. And then after that, the next one was to Maywood. I ended up being more of a harness player. I went to Maywood Park in May of 1990, right before I graduated high school. Again, it was absolutely packed. I'm like, wow, there's like 10,000 people here. Is this how it normally is? I had no idea. It happened to be Windy City Pace Day. If you know anything about harness racing, the Windy City Pace was one of the premier three-year-old races in the country at the time. I didn't know. And that in 1990, May 1990, the race was won by a horse called Jake and Elwood, for you old school harness players out there, who was a Michigan bred, who was driven by Hervé Filion. Of course, that is the father of Sylvain Filion, famous Filion family from Canada. I think he was like 1-5 or something. Anyway, that was my first experience of live harness racing. And I was really more of a harness racing guy until through college in my mid 20s. I was really more of a harness racing guy until my early mid 20s. It was easier to read the program. They were all basically mile races, blah, 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 etc. And in college, I was just betting harness racing on rare occasions. There's no OTBs. I went to Indiana University. There's no gambling in Indiana. I had to drive to Illinois about an hour and a half to do any kind of gambling when I was at college. And I was doing some sports gambling. And that's really about it. I mean, very, very limited horse racing. I think I drove to Churchill Downs my junior year of college. That's the only time I've been to Churchill Downs, by the way. Drove to Churchill Downs by myself because my roommate really was not into horse racing. I'm like, it was only about an hour and a half away. I also drove to Louisville Downs, I think it was called, which was the half-mile hardest track in Louisville at the time. Anyway, very limited with gambling. Of course, when I was home over the summers, I would go to the OTB and bet mainly harness racing, to be honest with you. My favorite bet, 7 across the board. Gotta love that win, play, show bet. Again, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, folks. I mean, really, until, and we'll get into it, but my first 10 years of gambling was ugly. Sure, I had some victories, but I didn't really know how to bet very well. I was learning from other people. Again, I didn't have a mentor, which is really difficult. I'm hoping that some of you had a mentor out there, but I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have anyone to lean on. I mean, I eventually started reading some books and talked to some smart people, and obviously got a lot better. And I consider myself a relatively smart person, and I know a lot about math. So eventually I was able to figure out. But yeah, I didn't really have a mentor or anyone that really helped me at the time. So I was, doing trifecta boxes and all the typical bets that you hear inexperienced players play, which I personally would not recommend at all, those types of bets. But, that makes you happy. Feel free. And I, obviously lost a lot more money than I won. And to be very honest, and like I said, I'm going to be transparent. My parents did not like the fact that I gambled. I gambled. I lost more money than I should have, um, and so that wasn't their favorite thing for me to do. They were never really fans of me going to the track, and I understand that because it can cause a lot of issues depending on people's chemistry and other things. So anyway, I totally get that. my gambling life started to change, I would say, and this is just a ballpark figure, in the early 2000s. So a good 20 years ago, I would say. Things started to change. I went to the OTB. I started getting into thoroughbred racing a lot more. I started reading some books. Um, Again, there weren't a lot of replay opportunities at that time either. If you're a longtime horse player, you know. I mean, it was hard to bet it was hard to watch replays at all. Again, there was barely the internet. I mean, it was crazy, right? And simulcasting was like maybe 2 or 3 tracks at the most. Things have actually changed a ton in the last 20, 25 years. I met a gentleman named Lee, and Lee was an older gentleman of mine. He's was about, got to do the math, about 25 years older than me. Uh, but he knew how to bet. And through the years, he always said, as we got to know each other and had a friendship, he always said that I was the best handicapper that he had known, but that I was a horrible gambler. And to some extent, he was absolutely right. I was not very good at ticket construction. I was not good formulating my opinions. My opinions were good, but he'd end up walking away from the OTB with wins, with winning money, and I would walk away often or sometimes losing money, even though I was giving him the winner because I wasn't betting correctly. And of course, betting is just so important. I've come a long, long way with ticket construction, how to bet accurately. I don't feel like I'm an A ticket constructionist. I'm working on, I'd say probably in the B plus range, but I do feel like that I'm a pretty solid handicapper. And when you put those two together, some special things can happen. There are a ton of fantastic handicappers out there. I wouldn't rank myself anywhere near the top in the country. I haven't accomplished nearly enough. That'd be completely ridiculous to even suggest. But I mean, I've had some moments which we'll talk about, and I feel like I do a nice job. But there's so many talented people out there. But Lee definitely helped change. He taught me about keying horses on top, um, for example, in a trifecta, or just how to again we're not going to get into it right now, but a lot of different ways on how to construct tickets and how to maximize your opinions. And that started changing things for me. And then I also got into horizontal betting. I was really not a horizontal player at all until about, again, 20 years ago, I would say, when I started getting into horizontals. I had my first pick six in the mid 2000s that I scored. I remember it very well. It was for $11,000. I was going crazy, like I just owned the world. Sure, $11,000 is a lot of money, but I mean the big scope of things, it's not. But when you're in your mid 30s and you hit for 11,000, huge deal. It was Naira. I was at New York. I think it was Belmont. I can't recall where, but I do remember I singled a turf horse, the number 11 horse. I don't remember the name. That was my first pick six in the early 2000s. I'm just going to tell you a few of my scores again. Please don't get the wrong impression, people. I've lost a ton of money in my career, especially my first 10 or 15 years. I mean, I am not in the positive in my overall gambling career. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I am. Obviously, I've had a lot of good runs recently, last 5 or 10 years, but didn't do as well earlier on for sure. And most people that say they are probably lying, to be honest. It's a very tough game. I had in the early 2010s at Arlington, they used to have a pick nine. You had to pick a winner of every race. I think it was a 20-cent bet. And I took down the whole pool, which is about 35,000 at that time. And then my biggest horizontal score was in 2017. It was Oaks Day 2017. You can look it up for yourself. The 2017 Kentucky Oaks was won by a Bob Baffert trained horse named Abel Tasman, who was 5-1 and who beat a horse called Daddy's Little Darling, 12-1. I think that was a Ken McPeak horse who came like a train late and almost got there, but Abel Tasman hung on. I did not have Daddy's Little Darling. I had like 5 horses in the race, and I had that pick five was about $38,000, and the pick four was about 6,000. So before taxes, that was my biggest score I've ever had. Again, you can look it up. 2017 Kentucky Oaks Day. I was one of about 11 or 12 people in the world that had the pick five. It was unbelievable. It was crazy. And I've had many other in terms of contest plays. This is a great story, very quickly. So contests, I didn't know anything about contests. Like, I was not a contest player. I didn't know they existed. In the summer of 2020, I think I have the date correctly. Early in the summer of 2020, I've always been a fan of In the Money Media and Peter Thomas Foreign Sales. Shout out to In the Money Media, who helped me get started on this crazy journey. Um, I signed up for the NHC tour. And when you sign up for the NHC tour and you get a membership, you have, at the time, you have an option to be mentored by someone or talk to someone. And at that time, Jonathan Kitchen was one of the, he was on TV, of course, or he was on with Piers Thomas Foreign Tal on their show at DRF and many other places. Um, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. I can talk to Jonathan Kitchen. So I gave him a call, and he was driving up to, if he ever hears this, he probably won't, but he was on his way from Austin, Texas to Saratoga. He was driving in the car, and I just happened to call him because his cell phone was available. And we talked a good like 20 minutes. He gave me 20 minutes. He was very nice. And I'm like, what do you do for contests? I mean, I had no idea. This is less than 3 years ago, people. This is early summer of 20, really almost about 3 years ago, almost to the day. Um, and he told me about there's this thing called horse players, and uh, you know, uh, you can do these pick and praise, and you can do live money. And I'm like, oh, this all sounds cool. And my very first real tournament was the Arlington. I don't know what they called it, the Arlington Handicapping Challenge, summer of 2020, and I did it with a friend. It was a $2,000 entry because there's no way I was doing that by myself. That's a lot of money. It's still a lot of money, but I did it with a friend, and we did very well. We came in like 12th or something, and won some money on the side, and I was hooked until then. 2021. Right, that was summer of 2020, I believe. And then I got into more contests. 2021, I was in the BCBC for the first time and had a nice score there that I've talked about in the show. I had a double into um, Love's Only You. If you remember that, was a Japanese horse that won. I won like $40,000, something crazy. I finished, and then I had a run from the BCBC 2021 BCBC Breeders' Cup until like spring of 22. I had some crazy run, ridiculous. I had a nice top 50 in the BCBC 2021. Then I came in fifth in the Pegasus World Cup Betting Challenge in 2022. Again, all this can be looked up if you really want to. Then I finished second in the Ultimate Betting Challenge, which is one of the major events of the year. That was my biggest score ever. And then a few weeks later, I won a Santa Anita Challenge, which was much less money, but I actually won the tournament. And I've done pretty well in some New York betting contests as well through Naira. So anyway, the rest of 2022 was not great for me. And then of course this year, 2023, from a contest perspective, had a nice placing in the NHC, and of course our great co-host and good friend Paul Halloran won the Grade One Gamble. So I've not won a major yet, so to speak, a Grade One Gamble or an NHC or a BCBC or a Pegasus or an Ultimate Betting Challenge, but I've done very well, and I'm knocking on the door. And I've only been doing this for a few years, so again, I don't mean bragging. I'm sorry but just tell everyone my gambling history. Mixed in with all that, of course, were many, 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 many losing days, losing pick fours, pick fives. It's a very tough game. One thing I hope that I don't come across as someone who's arrogant or, ostentatious or a know-it-all. There are people out there that have accomplished so much more than I have, and are better at this game than I have. And I have so much respect for all those people. It is a very tough game. I'm very proud of many things. We'll get into the HHH Racing Podcast there in a second. But it's horse racing gambling is a very tough game. Anyone says that win all the time is lying. Some of the best professional gamblers in the world, especially those that are horse players, will tell you they've had losing months, losing year, and then they crush it for a few weeks or months. So it's very yin yang. It's a very difficult game, but boy, is it a lot of fun for sure. And I love playing it. let me get into the HHH Racing Podcast. That's where I'm going to end this story of mine. So, as you can see, I'm repping the hat. The HHH Racing Podcast was an interesting story, uh, and a fun story that I want to share with you. A lot of you might be wondering, Howard, how'd you get started? Well, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a few other things here that I have on the side here. First, let me show you something I'm very proud of. Of course, there is our YouTube channel. If you are not familiar, just simply type in hhhracingpodcast.com in the search bar. And this is, of course, the YouTube channel. I'll go ahead and split screen here a little bit. In fact, let me throw up a little bit of a background here. Let me throw up a green background for you. Um, how did the HHH Racing Podcast start? Well, as you know, I always wanted to be sort of famous sports broadcaster, and this show really came out of a few things, for a few reasons. As I said, 2017 to 2020 was very difficult. After my father had passed, both my parents were gone. There were family dynamics that were tricky, um, and it was a tough time for me in a lot of ways, physically, emotionally, financially, etc. I was not coaching at the time. COVID was, still ongoing, and I felt like I had to sort of reinvent myself. I'm like, what am I going to do for fun? Um, I need to find an outlet. I'm sure we've all been there in our life. There's a point where boy, things are just not going my way. Again, professionally, things were fine. Teaching was fine. I love teaching high school math, but I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't happy with a lot of things in my life. And I was lucky enough to be on the Matt Bernier show 3 times. If you're familiar with the Matt Bernier show, a few years ago, he did something called the Friday feature, which he allowed guests to predict who was going to win a race that he designated. And you put your pick below the video player on his YouTube channel. And I happened to be lucky enough to not only to win 3 times with some pretty unique horses and some clever opinions. I got lucky with 12 to 1s, 10 to 1s. Not too. If you're a fan of the Power Picks tip sheet, you know what I'm talking about. It started way back then. And just to show you, if you're interested in seeing those, if you go to my YouTube channel or our YouTube channel, if you hit this About tab there and you scroll down under the about, you can look below and there's some links. This is my first appearance on the Matt Bernier show. This was my second. This one right here, if you can see my cursor at the bottom, this was my third appearance on the Matt Bernier show as a guest. There's also places you can also donate. If you'd like to help out the channel, we'd really appreciate it. You can hit the donate button and donate a few bucks or as much as you'd like, or you could hit the support the podcast here button. But anyway, you can see my appearances on the Matt Bernier show there. And I had a lot of fun. I really had a lot of fun doing the Matt Bernier show. Matt is I would consider a friend of mine now. I don't see him too often. Of course, he's traveling. We don't live in the same parts of the country, but every time I have a chance to see him, we say hello, text him, whatever. He's very busy, obviously, but fantastic guy. And I started getting the itch. I felt like I did pretty well. I got a lot of good feedback on those shows from just random viewers. Like, this Howard guy sounds like you know what he's talking about. I'm like, are you talking about me? It was pretty cool. Obviously, my teaching allows me to explain things well. At least I think they do, and I articulate my opinions in a cogent manner. And I had some success. And I always wanted to do broadcasting. I actually have done some broadcasting way back in the day. Right after college, I actually did some football play-by-play for then it was called AT&T Cable, turned into Comcast for local high school. I did some play-by-play and some stand-up on the sideline, some sideline reporting. So I do have a little bit of broadcast experience, not very much, but a little bit. I wanted to get into it. You have to find your passion. I said to myself, what is my passion? What do I really like? I like broadcasting, even though I only done a little bit of it. I like teaching, and I love horse racing. I'm like, you know what? I think I can try this podcast thing. Now, I knew absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Zero about podcasts. I didn't know. I'm horrible at technology. I didn't know about the technology. I didn't know how to start one. I mean, I didn't know a damn thing. I mean, to go from nothing to creating this was crazy, really, to me. So the fact that that happened was pretty nuts, to be blunt. Um, so I had a lot of work to do. If you go back and look at the earlier podcast, and it's really fun to do, just very quickly. I've done this a few times on my show. If you go to, home, or actually if you go to videos, you could scroll down, just keep scrolling down. Again, you scroll down to the very bottom. I mean, you look at the intro video or some of this other stuff. I mean, you could see some of the earlier shows. You can see I had different logos and different whatever. You can see a whole bunch of stuff. Or if you go to live, click on live, and you can just keep scrolling down again. You can just go all the way down to the very beginning of the shows, and you can see what the shows were like. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. It was bad. I didn't have the technology I had now. It was crazy. I watched way, way too many YouTube videos that for a 50-year-old trying to figure out how do I do this podcast thing? How do I improve it? And I got in touch with Peter Thomas Forntal and some of the people at In the Money Media. And I started doing some free work for them and got in touch with their producers and eventually got the software that I use now, which is called StreamYard. I'm going to show you a few things very quickly. And things started really improving. I always thought that our show earlier on, which was just me, I gave very good information. I thought my picks were in general excellent. We had a lot of successes. Um, and I thought I showed replays. I mean, the horse racing knowledge aspect of it I thought was good. The production value shaky, but I was new at it. I really had no idea what I was doing at all. In fact, we're only just over 2 years in now, and things look completely different now than they did then. So I thought it'd be fun very quickly to show you a few things. And what I'm going to show you here in just a second is some behind the scenes look of the HHH Racing Podcast. These are some things that most of you, I don't think, have ever seen. The first thing I want to show you is where I actually do the podcast, which you've never seen. So I have an office in my house, and I'll show it to you right now. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger so you can see. There we go. I'll go ahead and bring it on screen right now. So that is looking into my office. That is obviously the opposite view of what you guys see at home. You can see it. There's the screen that I have in the background. Here's the lighting that I use. There's actually two monitors. There's a camera. I sit about right there. There's the background. So there is the room that I do um, my podcast in. It works well. It's a wooden floor. It's a little bit echoey. It's not perfect, but I never thought I'd be doing a podcast when I bought the house that I'm in right now. So, uh, it works real well. And then the other view, which I think more people have seen because I've tweeted out and things like this. This is the view looking at the TVs. I have two TVs. There's the camera. I got stuff in the background. Again, you can't see everything, but there's my setup. Basically, some people have three TVs. Some people have four TVs. Um, Mine's pretty basic. It's just two TVs, two monitors. I started with one monitor. I don't know how the hell I did it with one monitor. It was ridiculous. But anyway, the rest is history. I also thought I'd sort of show you StreamYard. Now, this is going to look a little bit weird because I'm going to show you StreamYard while I'm on the show. So it's going to look a little bit odd, but I think you'd still find it fun just for a few seconds here. So uh, I'm going to show you what it looks like here. I think everything is working okay. So there are there. What I want to show you is on screen. There's echo. I apologize. I can hear echo. But I click on the banners, and here's the things I bring up there. You see on the side of the screen, and then here's all the other pictures and videos and things. So I have a whole setup. Let me go ahead and stop sharing there. Again, if you heard if you're hearing echoing in the background, I apologize. But anyway, there you go. So I've got a whole, setup on the side, and I don't have a producer or an editor. I'm just clicking buttons randomly. That's why when I look to the right, you know what I'm looking at. It's pretty crazy. Would be easier if I had a producer, but I don't want to spend the money to do all that. And so that's sort of what StreamYard looks like. It's a great software. They don't sponsor the show. I'm just throwing it out there. Um, and I did about 120 shows of this podcast on my own for the first year and a half, really. And then approximately a year ago, I brought on Pete Visco and Paul Halloran, who were just sort of fans of the show at the time. Pete Visco had been on the Matt Bernier show as well, and I think he saw me there first. And Paul Halloran had found out the show through his friend Doc Moore that he talks about. Um, and I talked to Paul on the phone about PR because his profession is in public relations, and I said, "How do I get this podcast going?" And we talked, and they become great friends. Even though I still have not met Pete Visco in person, believe it or not. Paul I've met several times, but I'll meet Pete in person this year um, at Saratoga in August for Whitney Week, which will be very cool. I met Kyle Roscoe in the summer of 2021 in person, um, and we become good friends. And he's the host of Bettin and Boozin, and then the other two younger co-hosts as well, Patrick Kunzel. I met; he was just a fan of the show. I ended up getting in touch with him, and then Charlie Freeman is actually a friend of the family, but I had not met him too until about a year and a half ago. I didn't even know that he was interested in horse racing, and so there you go. The rest is history, really. And the cool thing about I'll end this video here in a little bit, but this podcast has been a life changer for me. It's been absolutely unbelievable. I've met a whole group of new friends. Matt Miller, shout out to Matt Miller. I don't want to embarrass you, Matt. I'm sure you'll hear about this or you'll watch it yourself, but he's one of my best friends in the world right now, and I think he'd say the same about me. I would not have met Matt Miller if it was not for this podcast and Peter Thomas Fornatale, who in Breeders' Cup 2021 at Del Mar, I was sort of hanging out with PTF, Peter Thomas Fornatale. He said, "I have this friend, Matt Miller, who's from Chicago. I think you guys would hit it off a little bit." Little did I know that Matt Miller, it was the same Matt Miller that graduated 1 year before me. He's a year older at the same high school, Deerfield High School, and the same Matt Miller who has a brother named David, and Matt Miller's younger brother David is the same age as my brother Michael, and David and Michael were great friends in high school and fraternity brothers. And I didn't really know Matt that well, and then through this podcast and horse racing, we reconnect literally at 34 years later. Now he's one of my best friends. It's just crazy. Pete and Paul and Kyle and just everyone involved with the show, Charlie and Patrick. And I've met so many people in the horse racing world. Had the opportunity to be on TVG, which was crazy. Pete and Paul, I know you enjoyed me saying that. Um, just meeting horsemen, meeting jockeys, trainers. I mean, next week, as I'm filming this on April 26th, next week, I have a media credential to go to the Kentucky Derby. I mean, I've never been to the Kentucky Derby. People might find that surprising. It's always been a bucket list. If you told me 2.5 years ago I'd be going to the Kentucky Derby with a media credential, like legit, and be able to be right up close to all the action and be involved in the press conferences and everything, I would have thought you were crazy. I am so damn proud of everyone involved in the podcast, and I'm proud of myself. And I think it's okay to say that. Some things I'm not proud of that I've done in my life. This is something that I am extremely proud of. And I hope everyone there, you at home, whether you're watching or listening, has enjoyed the HHH Racing Podcast. And if you are learning about it for the first time, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Look into our Power Picks tip sheet through Patreon. Go to hhhracingpodcast.com. We have a website. You can learn all about everything that I'm discussing. It's been a life changer. It's been amazing. I could not have done it without you folks at home who have been watching and listening for close to 2.5 years now. And the last thing that I want to say about the podcast is the worst thing that I could do is come on as someone who's arrogant, over the top, know it all, jerk. I'm in general a very humble guy, very humble. And I like to try to keep it that way on our show. But you know what? If I'm not going to toot our own horn and promote the show, who's going to do it? There is so much out there. There are so many great podcasts out there, with horse racing and just people who are in the business. I like to think we're one of the best podcasts and YouTube channels out there based on the information we give, our personalities, the way we structure everything. I'm really proud. We've only been around for 2.5 years. So if we talk about some successes, you got to do it in this business. You got to tell people your successes, but we also tell people when we're wrong, and I'm wrong all the time, just like everyone else. It's a very difficult game. I take chances. It's called gambling for a reason, right? It's part of the business. But I'm willing to throw my opinions out there, and hopefully, I know for a fact that a lot of you have cashed not only on my opinions, but the opinions of Pete, Paul, uh, Kyle, Charlie, Patrick, etc. It's been an incredible journey. I don't plan on going anywhere. I love what I do, and again, I just really appreciate everyone's support out there. So I think that's going to wrap it up in general. Again, let me just below the video player. There's my email, hkravetshorse@gmail.com. Again, I would prefer comments about my story in this documentary. Comments down below the video player. Please smash that like button. Please spread the word. Again, if you are not familiar with me or the podcast, please check out the HHH Racing Podcast. We have an incredible amount of shows during Derby week, but watch well beyond that. We're on usually Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, some combination of that. Wednesday night is our Bettin and Boozin show, and Thursday night is our flagship show. And we also have shows earlier in the week. But if you want to share something of more personal nature, sure, you can email me as well. I'd be happy to listen to you. That is my story, folks. Again, really appreciate. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate your support, your love out there, of the podcast, of the YouTube channel. Please continue to watch. Please continue to crush those bets, as I like to say, and hopefully you can glean some good information, and some good feelings from my story. Look forward to seeing all of you next week during our Kentucky Derby shows. And if you're watching after the Kentucky Derby, please make sure you watch our shows for the rest of the Triple Crown season and beyond. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. Have a great night. Bye-bye.